The running locked intradermal suture invented in 1993 is an invisible surgical suture technique. It's useful for closing simple elliptical excisions where the wound is under light tension. First take deep to superficial, then superficial to deep bites to place an anchoring suture at one pole of the wound. Then reflect the wound edge on one side back to take another deep to superficial bite. Pull the suture through but don't tighten too much so you leave a little loop. On the contralateral side, take a superficial to deep bite and pull the suture through while still retaining the previous loop. Now insert the needle through that loop, and after pulling through, pass the needle through the loop one more time, but this time exit the needle through the new loop created. Pull upward to tighten and you will notice that a locking effect takes place, but that doesn't mean you're done. Before taking the next bite, pass the needle down the center of the wound under the stitch you just created to reinforce the lock. Now repeat these steps down the rest of the wound. The downside is these locking loops of suture add significantly to the volume of retained suture material, increasing the chance of infection, but it also combines the benefits of buried sutures and running locked sutures to help reduce dead space and achieve close approximation of the epidermal wound edges. Very soon, surgeons located in the US may perform surgery on patients in Africa. Telesurgery is a groundbreaking innovation where advanced technology creates the presence of a surgeon when in reality the surgeon operating is on the other side of the planet. Theoretically, this could even allow teams of surgeons in different parts of the world to work together on the same patient. Just last year, surgeons at a university hospital in Singapore remotely conducted a series of gastrectomies on an artificial stomach more than 5,000 kilometers away in Japan, and while they operated from their cockpit in Singapore, every tiny movement performed was transmitted to and replicated by the arms of a surgical robot. However, the use of regular telecommunication lines is not feasible over vast distances because currently the average bandwidth is unable to support rapid enough transmission of information needed for telesurgery. So telesurgery requires a dedicated international fiber optic network to bring specialized surgical care to underserved and hard to reach parts of the world when surgery I showed you this technique of suturing subcutaneous tissue with barbed suture material, specially created for knot-free suturing. And one of the most common questions you guys have asked is how can it be removed? Usually an absorbable material is used so that it can be left in the body and slowly disintegrate on its own. But this process can take anywhere from 3 months to a year or even longer. And during this time, if a problem occurs that means it needs to be removed, here's how it's done. A number 12 scalpel blade is used to cut all the visible portions of the suture. It's essential to make the pieces as small as possible so that they're easier to remove. Once cut, the fragments are pulled out in the same direction that they were placed. If you try to remove them in the opposite direction, there'll be a lot of resistance from the barbs, and trying to force them out the wrong way will cause severe damage to the tissues. Some potential complications that will require barbed sutures to be removed include infection around the suture material due to a breach in sterility, excessive inflammation due to the body's reaction to a foreign material, and failure of absorption of the material for extended periods of time. Stitching up wounds may seem easy, but there's a lot of thought and effort that goes into getting it just right. These simple running sutures are fast and easy, but they don't stop wound edges from curling inward, which delays healing and results in bigger scars. If left in long enough, it can also cause permanent track marks on the skin. Running horizontal mattress sutures are great at everting wound edges to reduce scarring, but if put on too tight, they can reduce blood flow to the skin edge. This can slow down healing and even cause the wound edge skin to die and fall off, which is why surgeons eventually came up with the victory stitch. It's similar to the horizontal mattress suture, but the bites taken on either side of the wound are much smaller, and the needle is passed to the other side of the wound at a 45-degree angle, giving it a V-shaped pattern. It reduces the proportion of skin at risk for having a reduced blood supply, while still maintaining proper aversion of skin edges to reduce scarring. The minimal amount of suture material pressing on the skin also reduces the risk of track marks, but also has the disadvantage of making these sutures much harder to remove. Surgeons puncture gloves during surgery all the time without even knowing it. This means the gross germs and sweat from their hands can leak out of the gloves and cause surgical site infections. Double gloving can help prevent this, but don't just wear 2 of the same gloves over one another. The glove you wear first is called the puncture indicator underglove. It has to be half a size larger than your regular glove size, and in a darker color like blue or green. The overglove is usually white and has to be in your exact glove size. Surgical gloves are pretty sturdy, so one pass with a surgical scalpel is not going to cut them, but other sharp tools and sharp edges of broken broken bones can easily slice through, which is why orthopedic surgeons must always double glove. This way, if the outer glove is breached, the inner glove provides an additional layer of defense and sterility is maintained. Every hour in surgery, you can put your hands in and out of the incision thousands of times, so even if you manage to keep your outer gloves intact, you should still change them every 60 to 90 minutes. Here's the simplest suturing technique. Load the needle driver by grabbing the needle about 2/3 of the way up. Make sure it is at a 90-degree angle with the driver and squeeze it until the first ratchet catches. This is the standard way of gripping the driver for optimal control, or you can use the palm grip for optimal dexterity. Holding the forceps like a pencil, gently grasp the tissue to stabilize it. Enter the skin with the suture needle at a 90-degree angle. Advance it by supinating the wrist to follow the shape of the needle instead of pushing it through. Remember, supination is the movement you make when you scoop soup with your hand. Once the tip of the needle pokes out into the wound, stabilize the tissue on the opposite side and continue supinating until the tip exits the skin at a 90-degree angle. Make sure the needle enters and exits roughly the same distance from the wound edge. Grab the end of the needle and continue supinating until it is fully out of the skin. Hold the needle driver along the length of the wound, wrap the long end around it twice, then grab the short end and pull the ends in opposite directions. Pull the long end to one side to lock the knot and secure it with at least 2 more throws, but for these, only wrap the long end around the needle driver once. Human hair is one of the oldest surgical suture materials, but even now with widespread access to modern suture materials, many surgeons still prefer to use it. It's freely available and easily sterilized by autoclaving. It's also very fine with an average diameter of 50 microns, and so it passes easily through the eye of the finest needle, making it perfect for very delicate microsurgery involving the eyes, blood vessels, and skin. If the patient's own hair is used for suturing, the body does not generate an inflammatory reaction, because it does not recognize it as a foreign body. This greatly minimizes scarring as compared to other suture materials that cause big immune reactions and delay healing. Being such a low-cost and widespread monofilament suture material, hair can be useful when other suture materials are not widely available, such as in third world countries with a lot of poverty or in the battlefield. Thanks to its pliable and smooth nature, it glides easily through the tissues, causing minimal trauma. And I was very surprised to see how secure the knots were, especially for a monofilament suture material. Wildlife vets love to store syringes loaded with pre-calculated doses of drugs in their hair. This can be very risky and should only be performed with ultimate caution in unconventional situations where there is no better option. Here's a safety analysis of some of the hairstyles I've seen used for the temporary storage of drugs. The pencil bun is probably the worst option because you don't want all your hair to come undone when it's time to use the drugs. The most common technique is sticking the syringe with a tightly capped needle down behind a full or half ponytail. As you can see, the wings of the syringe won't allow it to fall out the bottom. This style is very risky though, as if the cap does loosen and fall off the needle, you might end up being stabbed in the neck. So maybe a safer style would be to put the syringe through horizontally like this. If a large hair clip is available, the loaded syringe can even be clipped over the bun. This helps create more distance between you and the needle. Placing the needle facing up might be safer as it reduces the chance of the cap falling off, but overall this will make retrieval and uncapping of the needle less efficient. Ideally, we want to be able to remove the syringe from the hair and uncap it single-handedly. Why on earth are the sterile gowns surgeons wear during surgery always blue? In the early 20th century, surgeons only wore white gowns to signify cleanliness. However, as operating rooms became more advanced, the brighter surgical lighting reflected off the white gowns, causing glare, and made it harder for surgeons to see clearly. Modern blue gowns absorb light, reducing reflection and improving visibility. Blue and green are also on the opposite side of the color wheel from red, which is the predominant color of blood and internal tissues. This contrast helps surgeons better focus on the surgical field. Additionally, after staring at the red tones of blood and tissues for prolonged periods of time, the red-sensitive cone cells in the eye become overstimulated. This can cause a temporary visual fatigue to red, making it harder to distinguish the subtle differences in shades of the same color. By intermittently shifting their gaze at blue or green, surgeons can reset their eyes by activating different cones and allowing the overstimulated red-sensitive cones to recover. So integrating blue and green into surgical gowns, drapes, and environments improves their ability to discern subtle details in the red-dominated surgical field. A lot of the knots we use in surgery come from very humble beginnings. The miller's knot, for instance, was developed hundreds of years ago by the people working in grain mills. They used it to secure the openings of large sacks containing milled grains. Since a sack of milled grain was very expensive at the time, these knots had to be very secure. And it's that security that makes the miller's knot perfect for tying off blood vessels before they are cut during surgery. It's created by passing a length of suture material around clamped blood vessels twice to create 2 overlapping loops. The needle driver is then passed through the first loop, and a double throw of the long end of suture material is made around its tip in a counterclockwise direction. It then grabs the short end of suture material and both ends are pulled in opposite directions to tighten the loops and constrict the vessels. The overlapping loops create higher friction in the knot portion of the ligature, which prevent it from loosening before a series of square knots can be tied. The miller's knot is so secure that it can provide leak-free ligation at even high arterial pressures, whereas the surgeon's knot could definitely not be trusted in such high-pressure situations.